What's up guys? So after doing a full review of both Azure Gleam and Golden Wildfire, now it's finally time to review the final route of Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, which of course I'm sure you can guess is Scarlet Blaze. Or as the title states, the route that I think is the most important out of all 3 routes. Now before I get into the review itself, just like with the other 2 videos, I'm going to go through the whole route as well as covering its good ending, though there may not be much of a good ending depending on what side of the fan base you fall on, but I'll be covering all of Scarlet Blaze in its entirety in as little detail as possible for the sake of brevity. But with that being said, if you haven't played through this route yourself yet, I highly encourage you to do that before continuing in this video, because I will be spoiling all of the major plot points of this route, and of course if you don't mind being completely spoiled, then by all means, keep watching. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. Now the prologue is pretty much the same regardless of which route you end up going with. You run into all of the 3 leaders, fight some bandits, learn how they all fight, and after being forced to go to Garreg Mach against your will, you get to choose your own house. And to play through Scarlet Blaze, lover or hater, you of course are going to have to pick Edelgard. And on your very first mission with all 3 houses, you have to take down a bandit stronghold. And this stronghold just so happens to have Monika being held captive in it. Now with the previous routes, it seems that rescuing Monika was just a mere coincidence. But in Scarlet Blaze, it's revealed that Monika being saved may have actually been Edelgard's plan all along, regardless of which route you're in. At least that's what it seems. Because it kind of looks like Edelgard could have possibly clued Jeritza into her plan in the other routes, and Jeritza just decided to drag the other houses along to rescue Monika for her. Or the more likely possibility is I'm just reading into her conversation with Hubert way too much. Because Edelgard still seems genuinely surprised to even run into Monika at the bandit stronghold in the first place, so maybe they were talking about someone else in that conversation? I'm not really sure. But after rescuing Monika, it seems her and Hubert are going to have an extremely interesting relationship with the both of them, both striving and competing with one another to see who is more useful to Edelgard than the other. And honestly, I love this competitive relationship that they have, and I could not wait to see how it developed throughout the rest of the game, and spoiler alert, it's actually one of my favorite relationships that Hubert has, to be honest. Now, whether Monika's rescue was intentional or not, it appears that both Hubert and Edelgard are aware that some of the Empire is working with those who slither in the dark, because not only is it heavily alluded to during their conversation that I just mentioned, but after Tomas is revealed to be evil, unlike in the other routes, Edelgard plans to start a coup d'etat of sorts, and plans to do so with the help of the Church of Seiros. Because just like how Tomas was revealed to not actually be Tomas anymore, Edelgard suspects the same thing has happened with her uncle, Lord Arundel. And after the battle that happens in Enbar, Edelgard obviously was right about her uncle, who ended up being Talus in disguise. And of course, he disappears. Though she may have not been able to capture him, she does also end up apprehending Ferdinand's father, who was working for him. And I gotta say, Ferdinand is not happy about this whatsoever. But before giving Ferdinand an explanation, Edelgard has a conversation with both Counts Hevering and Bergles about making preparations for a coming war, while in the same breath making Count Varley the new bishop of the Southern Church. Honestly, all of this shaking up the status quo is actually why I love Edelgard so much, though in 3 Hopes she is infinitely more aggressive on her approach. And speaking of aggressive changes, after a 2-year time skip, Edelgard declares war on the very church that helped her become emperor 2 years prior. And the pretext for this war is honestly commendable enough. I don't necessarily agree with it, because I don't see the Central Church as being nearly as corrupt or oppressive as Edelgard claims it to be, because yes, they did develop the crest system, and some of those nobility have definitely been causing oppression, but I don't see that as the Central Church's fault, because they are supposed to be neutral in these kinds of affairs, and yes, they obviously are far from neutral, given that Fargus can't even have a king unless the Central Church approves of said king, and they literally just helped Edelgard start an uprising 2 years prior. But as I was saying, I just see that as the wrong people being in charge, which in turn those wrong people begin abusing their positions, which in turn causes said oppression, which does in fact definitely need to be changed, and I think we can all agree with that. And I guess it's because of those exact reasonings that I just mentioned that from Edelgard's point of of view, the church isn't as neutral as they claim to be, and she views this situation as the central church is just standing by and letting all of this oppression happen. And if that is in fact her reasoning, then shit, sign me up for the war. But as far as we know, it's not her reasoning, so I'm still going to be slightly against her justifications. But regardless of what I think, it definitely was good enough for the Southern Church, and that's all that really matters. And after seeing some of how she reshaped the Empire, though this war isn't necessarily the best path towards a better future, it is a path to it nonetheless. Moving forward with one of the Alliance Lords defecting to the Empire, the road to conquering Garreg Mach was a pretty easy one considering all of the very particular planning that went into this move, from the Western Church occupying one of the Central Church's sacred sites, which caused a majority of their forces to be drawn away from Garreg Mach, and the timing of the declaration of war, as well as the Empire invading the Alliance around that exact same time. It is shown very quickly how thought through this entire plan is, which is why, though I don't agree with the approach any more than I did in Crimson Flower, it is still such a fun experience, and after defeating Rhea at Garreg Mach, she leaves the monastery with a very ominous threat towards Edelgard. And seeing Rhea pissed is kind of terrifying, I'm not gonna lie. Now, after seeing Claude's reaction to Count Gloucester and Acheron flipping to the Empire's side, we watch as Dimitri makes the decision to go to war with the Empire. Despite the fact that he agrees with Edelgard's ultimate goal, but he also states that he just doesn't agree with her methods because he does not believe that the Kingdom of Fargus is stable enough to stand without the Church. But if you know anything about Fargus, I really don't think it matters whether the Church is involved or not. The whole country's a mess. And whether that's true or not, meanwhile, Edelgard has Count Berkeles invade Leicester while she makes her way to the kingdom. Around the same time as her arrival at the border with the Kingdom of Fargus, she is notified that Count Rowe has defected to the Empire, and that Lord Lenato of Castle Gaspard, also in the Kingdom of Fargus, has gone AWOL and promised to hunt down and kill Rhea himself. But Ash and his troop have been tasked to put an end to Lord Lenato before he can deliver on his promise. And after you save Lord Lenato, you immediately have to race to the other side of the continent to save someone else. This someone being the same Count Berkeles that was tasked with invading Leicester. Because it seems that the Alliance Lords who swore their allegiance to the Empire were actually following a plan that was cooked up in an attempt to gain the upper hand against the Empire. But unfortunately for Claude, the plan doesn't go as smoothly as he had hoped. After the first battle, not only does the Alliance lose Gloucester territory, but also Ordalia's and Phlegethon's territories. And if that wasn't a large enough blow to the Alliance, Lorenz, Ignatz, and Balthus are all recruited by the Empire. And while Claude reveals that he has enlisted the help of the Ashen Demon to what is left of the Golden Deers, it is made clear that if the tide of the war does not go in the favor of the Alliance soon, Marianne and Lysithea will have to abandon Claude as well. And with that wonderful news, Claude praises how strong the Alliance's loyalties are. And though in the other routes this never really seems to be much of an issue, other than being referenced in passing by Claude and Golden Wildfire, in this route it really does go to show that when push comes to shove, it really is every man for themselves as far as the members of the Alliance are concerned, with all of them potentially abandoning Claude left and right. But while saving Count Berkeles and recruiting literally 90% of the Golden Deers within these few chapters, after leaving Claude and Hilda to deal with the aftermath, you yet again head to the kingdom to yet again rescue Count Rowe from an attack. But this time, Dimitri himself has come to put an end to Count Rowe's life. Upon arrival, it seems that the gates of the Silver Maiden have been breached, and the Black Eagles have to come to Count Rowe's rescue. And this battle was not easy for either side. The kingdom loses both Mercedes and Ingrid among all of the soldiers in this battle, with Mercedes potentially being recruited and Ingrid unfortunately being slain. And this is what marks the downward spiral for anyone who holds the Blue Lions dear to their hearts like myself. Because though Ingrid wasn't exactly my favorite character by any means, when I finished fighting her and saw her laying on the floor next to her Pegasus, the only words I had were the iconic "oh shit, oh fuck" meme. Because I was just not expecting a death this early on in the game, and the immediate remorse I felt was only intensified with the cutscene immediately after of Dimitri mourning her death and vowing revenge. And he also also ends up leaving the scene without even her body to bury, which just makes the whole situation that much worse. Because just think about imagining watching a childhood friend die and then not being able to bring them back from the battlefield to have a proper funeral. It's just an awful thing to think about. Now, on the Black Eagles side of things, the only one who really seems to reciprocate my feelings were Dorothea and obviously Ash as well as Mercedes. Not to say that the rest of the group wasn't sad whatsoever, but they all knew that it was a necessity. Edelgard then tells the group that she plans for all of them to return to Enbar, because with the Empire now holding Aryan Road on the Fargus front, as well as having an allegiance with the Western Church, on top of holding the Great Bridge of Myrddin on the Eastern front, and having Garrick Mach between both of these areas, both her and Hubert feel that these key positions will be enough to hold the line while everyone takes a very much needed break, and so they can all rethink some strategies going forward in the war. And upon reflecting on this news, Shez has a conversation with Arval and reveals that Shez doesn't think that they need to obsess on getting revenge anymore, which unlike in the other two routes, yes, Shez isn't as gung-ho as Arval is in any point in time, but Shez also was never flat out blunt about how they don't want to go after Byleth to Arval, and I think this is a pretty interesting distinction from the other two routes. But going forward, Hubert pulls both Shez and Lysithea into the woods to discuss the situation with those who slither in the dark. Hubert says that he worries that they might try to recruit Shez, and immediately after, both he and Lysithea question Shez directly about whether Shez would switch sides if it is revealed that they are family. And despite Shez not giving an immediate response, Hubert leaves Shez to think about this harsh possibility. Now, upon finally arriving at Enbar, Monica, Shez, and Edelgard are all found enjoying a walk through the palace's gardens, where Monica finally musters up the courage to ask Edelgard on a date with Shez's assistance. And after this cute little moment, Hubert suddenly bursts in and notifies Edelgard that the Church of Seiros has snuck into the palace through a secret corridor, where he immediately assumes that Shez is in league with the Church of Seiros, and then we are given this stunning cinematic of Shamir attempting to assassinate Edelgard, with Hubert almost killing Monica in an attempt of retaliation. And after defeating the troop led by Catherine and capturing Shamir, it is also revealed that Ferdinand's father has gone missing from the dungeon. And I really appreciate that though Ferdinand is obviously very proud of his family and his name, he isn't blind to the fact that his father needs to be punished, and even accepts the fact that having his father tried in court might not exactly be a possibility. And honestly, though he comes across as possibly the most airheaded out of the entire Three Houses / Three Hopes cast, he is a lot more intelligent than I think we all give him credit for. Though Dorothea would agree with me that her Mr. Right isn't the brightest in social situations, he definitely does have intellect in other areas. Now, as far as the story is concerned though, moving forward, it's revealed that the secret passage is essentially only a passage that Rhea herself would have known of, since it hasn't been used in centuries, and wasn't even on the floor plans that the Empire themselves had access to. And after that nugget of information, Hubert gives Shez a very much needed apology while telling them that he assumed they were an informant for those who slither in the dark, and that essentially both Edelgard and Hubert had been leading them along this entire time to get a better gauge on Shez's abilities, and that they never really trusted Shez in the first place. But Edelgard at least says that she trusts them going forward and would like to quote-unquote begin the relationship anew. Honestly, unlike in the other two routes where both Claude and Dimitri trust you almost immediately and implicitly, I do like this drastic contrast, and at the same time I'm not really surprised because even in Three Houses, Hubert did not trust Byleth until a lot later in the story. So I was kind of expecting this, you know what I mean? But I don't necessarily know if I agree with Shez's decision to just let it be water under the bridge. Like, if I personally spent years with people I considered essentially a newfound family, and then it's revealed the entire time it had been basically a hoax, I think I would probably leave or at least feel some type of way. Then again, they had 6 months to get over it, so, you know. But regardless of what I think, Shez obviously decided to let it go after those 6 months, and after the brief time skip, we also see Edelgard having a discussion with Claude about forging an alliance. And after the meeting, it was quite interesting to see another contrast with the Golden Wildfire route, because Claude still planned to invade Fargus from the sea, but interestingly enough, there is no assistance from Almyra whatsoever. And it's even revealed that Shahid hasn't even returned to make another another attempt to invade Leicester either, which makes me wonder just how exactly is he going to get to Fargus, since we learned in Golden Wildfire that the Alliance doesn't necessarily have a navy. But after watching Claude discuss the Alliance's game plan, we return to the Black Eagles on the Western Front. We see that Edelgard and Hubert hope that most of the kingdom's lords, learning that they are stuck between a rock and a hard place, as Claude puts it, will just stand down. Though it may not be a possibility, because Hubert tells us that Dimitri has gotten rid of all of the nobles most likely to switch sides. And with that news, all of the Black Eagles come to terms that this might be the bloodiest part of the war yet. Soon after, we see that Claude is going to be holding out on invading the kingdom until the Empire gets close to seizing bladed territory, and Hilda surprises Claude by questioning if Edelgard will hold her word as far as the Alliance is concerned, which leads to Claude essentially saying that he isn't worried as long as Hilda is beside his side, which is pretty wholesome. And after that conversation ends, we see Dimitri and co discuss their next move against the Empire and the Alliance, with Margrave Gautier theorizing that because the Empire has been pushing their rapid reforms on all of the lords that they have conquered, there may be revolts that will cause the Empire to trip over itself. And we get a lovely look into Dimitri's true ideals during this conversation, by the way, which, just like in the other routes, he agrees with Edelgard's view that the crest system needs to go and many other things need to change as well, but he thinks that with shoving all of the reforms down the throats of these lands, it will risk rotting the region from the inside out. And though Dimitri would have been willing to work it out peacefully with Edelgard at one point, with Ingrid's death on the top of countless others, Dimitri isn't really willing to resolve it peacefully anymore at this point, which is beyond fair, and you can see how Dimitri could become the man that we see in Three Houses with this exact conversation. After this scene though, this is the beginning of where this route becomes a living nightmare of sorts for all of the Blue Lion stands, because in the following chapter you can recruit Byleth, but whether or not you end up recruiting them, the Black Eagles still end up slaying Felix's father Rodrigue regardless of your choice. And it does not seem like the killing is going to stop anytime soon, because soon after you encounter Annette, her father, and Baron Dominic. And though this is the last thing that Gustave had wanted, Annette is on the front lines with her trusty relic. And unfortunately for me and everyone else who loves Annette dearly, this is easily the most heartbreaking fight in the entire game to me, because both Gustave and Annette end up dying in the fight that ensued. And the only person who seems to relate in any way to how I am feeling is Mercedes. Like, legit, I never thought that this game could manage to make me cry, but it did twice. Not only did I end up crying after killing Annette, but also just imagining how Mercedes feels, because when you talk to her after this fight, she's just entirely speechless. One can only imagine what killing her best friend could have possibly done to her, both mentally and emotionally. But after claiming victory and finally conquering nearly half of Fargus, the reason for the war finally clicks with Shez. Though the war may be with the kingdom and the central church, the war really is with the ways of the world itself. And though Edelgard doesn't know whether she'll leave Fodlan better than she found it, she is trying her best, which I think is honestly the best way to put it. As I've said before, I don't necessarily agree with Edelgard, but just like with Dimitri, they are both going about this whole situation the best way that they know how. And though I know that Edelgard doesn't want all of this death, at the end of the day, Three Hopes seems to be at its simplest a battle of methods between Dimitri and Edelgard rather than just ideals. Because obviously they both ideally agree about what needs to change, but they have different ways of going about it. And after that revelation from Shez, Edelgard is informed that there has been a recent revolt in both Ordalia and Hrim territories, which just about anyone can guess it's those who slither in the dark. And just like in Golden Wildfire, it's just bandit attacks, really, on the surface. Like, we don't actually figure out that it's those who slither in the dark until we actually get there. So, to me, what is the whole purpose of demonic beasts if you're literally not going to use them at all in this game? Like, in the context of the story, the demonic beasts are literally non-existent outside of Happy's supports. No one has ever mentioned demonic beasts, not even in any of the same conversations as those who slither in the dark. And the only time that we end up fighting them, there's no story reason for it whatsoever. They just show up and nobody acknowledges it. We just kill them, move on, and that's it. And as I said, I don't understand why demonic beasts aren't in the same conversations as those who slither in the dark, because in Three Houses, they were almost always around whenever we fought those who slither in the dark. And I'm sorry for sidetracking, but this is honestly my biggest gripe with Three Hopes. And as far as Scarlet Blaze Blaze is concerned at least, there's literally no reason for Edelgard to abandon victory of the war for fucking bandits. Regardless of whether they are affiliated with those who slither in the dark or not, it's over in Ordalia territory, Enhrim, but either way, it's nowhere near Enbar, so really, the Empire isn't in any danger. And if the Empire was in any danger, Count Bergles' territory is right there, with Count Bergles in his own territory at this point in time. And Holst is in Goneril still, which is right above Ordalia. So really, there was no need for us to go from the middle of the kingdom all the way to the other side of the goddamn continent. Because two of the strongest men in the entire freaking continent, canonically or otherwise, are within spitting distance of these two territories in question. Wouldn't it make infinitely more sense to send them both as opposed to pulling back a whole army from the other side of the continent? This shit makes no sense. And to make it even more aggravating for me, after leaving the front lines, she has Count Bergles stay in Aryan Road just in case. But regardless of how I feel about all of this, after traveling to Hrim territory and claiming the final Infinity Stone of the Leicester Alliance known as Leone, everyone is seen preparing to return to Fargus, where Edelgard is informed that there has been an attack on the stronghold of Fort Mercius that Caspar's brother, the future Count Bergles, has been stationed at. And this attack is led by none other than Ferdinand's father with the assistance of those who slither in the dark, as well as a handful of soldiers staging a rebellion on the inside of the fortress. On top of this, we are also informed that Duke Aegir's goal is to overthrow Edelgard and reclaim the throne for himself. Though the situation is bleak with many people being held captive by Duke Aegir's forces and a handful of minor lords also flocking to his aid, Monica points out that this is a prime time to wipe out all of those who oppose Edelgard once and for all. We also get to see that the former Duke Aegir is really just doing all of this out of desperation, saying he would have joined her side if she had just told him there was a place for him in her plans, which I find kind of weird given that he's the goddamn prime minister. It's not like that position is exactly redundant, which I don't even know where to begin with that. But anyways, in this same cutscene, he also states that if he were to be slain, he wants to die by his son's hand. And speaking of which, Ferdinand, bless his heart, feels that it's his fault that these events have transpired, and he explains to Edelgard that he wants to make things right. After Ferdinand literally beheads his father, instead of returning to the Western Front, we return to Garreg Mach, and Edelgard tells us that she decided to meet up with Claude on the Eastern Front, and together they will make one last push to Ferdiad. Meanwhile, Rhea requests the assistance of the kingdom to retake the monastery. And of course, the way that they go to reclaim the monastery is through the Valley of Torment, which just so happens to be the same exact way that Claude and Edelgard's armies are traveling. After we see this beautiful cutscene that sets the magnitude of this fight perfectly, the Empire and the Alliance have a grueling fight to go through if they want to continue to Galatea territory, which unfortunately this fight claims the life of yet another beloved Blue Lions character, Sylvain, who is very much determined to get revenge for Ingrid. And honestly, you can't help but feel bad for both Felix and Dimitri, because god did it hurt to kill Sylvain, and just hearing Dimitri beg Dedue to not throw away his life in this fight really puts everything into perspective. One can only imagine how Felix feels, since Sylvain convinced Felix to retreat, essentially saving him from his own fate, only for Sylvain to die in his place, which just really hurts. And after the battle, Dimitri is revealed to be missing, and Claude, Byleth, and Shez all go looking for him, while Edelgard wonders just where Rhea and the Church of Saros' forces could be, because during the battle in the valley, outside of Sedith and Flame making a guest appearance, their presence was essentially non-existent. Suddenly, Ferdinand in all of his wisdom theorizes there may be a secret path heading to Garreg Mach that only the Church knows about, that completely bypasses the Valley of Torment entirely. And with that possibility, Edelgard decides to have a portion of her army pull back to the monastery while the majority of the force leads on. And before we can see where this plot thread goes, Shez, or should I say Arval, finally decides to take an opportunity to strike at Byleth and kill them once and for all by themselves. And honestly, given how shaky the trust is for Shez as far as Hubert and Edelgard are concerned, I honestly think that recruiting Byleth may have not been the best decision, because now Hubert's suspicions have actually been confirmed, which we all know nothing is worse than that. Thankfully, Edelgard isn't as gung-ho about killing Shez as both Hubert and Ferdinand surprisingly are, and neither is Monica, thank God. But after saving Byleth from Arval, Arval kills Solone and transports all of the faction leaders to a mysterious place called Zahres or Zahres, I don't really know how it's pronounced. And in this area, you have the opportunity to witness Dimitri and Edelgard have a conversation, which is exactly the same as the one in Azure Gleam. But unlike in Azure Gleam, we now get to see Edelgard and Claude have a conversation together, which quite clearly puts Claude and Edelgard's intentions out there for all to see. Edelgard's true intentions with the war are to, of course, unify Fodlan, but also to dismantle the kingdom, more out of necessity than anything else, because as Edelgard puts it, the influence of the church in Fargus just runs way too deep. But after revealing that she has no intentions of killing Rhea whatsoever, she only wants to subdue Rhea and dismantle the church, which I find very surprising, and so does Claude, because Claude fully expected her to be more quote-unquote thorough, as he puts it, and though Claude doesn't really spell it out for Edelgard completely, he does have different plans, and the both of them hope to have a mutually beneficial relationship when the war is done and over with. Because they do share the same exact goal, Edelgard's goal is to reshape Fodland, while Claude has a much bigger picture in mind, which, though he doesn't say it specifically, I have reason to believe that it might be Almyra. Now, after defeating Epimenides, which unfortunately results in Arval's death as well, surprisingly, after returning to Fodland, Shez, Dimitri, Edelgard, and Claude all have a conversation, which actually was really cool to see. Edelgard reveals that she still has a bit of a soft spot for Dimitri, being as she doesn't immediately try to kill him and even lets him leave peacefully. Also, before Dimitri makes his leave, he makes it very clear that he hopes to be able to have a conversation with Edelgard in the future, likely pointing to him wanting a more peaceful resolution of the war. And as Dimitri leaves, Edelgard and Shez make their way to Garreg Mach, which is kind of the same direction Dimitri is heading to as well, I think, so I find that part a bit weird, but anywho, heading into the final battle, we see Count Varley in Garreg Mach be informed that the Knights of Seiros are knocking on their doorstep. He is also immediately informed that those who slither in the dark have begun attacking both the Church's forces and also the Empire's. And after watching Count Varley literally shit himself, we see Thalas issue orders to Mycen to eradicate literally all of the forces on the battlefield, regardless if they are the Church's or the Empire's. And we also get a very rare look at Rhea realizing who these forces are, which I find pretty interesting, because I don't recall her ever making this realization or even saying how dangerous they are in Azure Gleam, despite the fact that you're literally allies with her, but I digress. After all that exposition, we see that the Black Eagle's crew are all pondering over the recent events as they prepare for the final battle. Now honestly, this fight, in my opinion, was honestly the best final fight out of all of the routes, purely because you get to see that no one really gives a shit about Count Varley, and if you know anything about how he raised Bernie, then you would not be surprised to hear how happy I was when he died, and how happy I was to see that no one really cared. The closest thing to a semblance of remorse over his death was a half-hearted "oh" from Bernie, and Hubert complaining about how much of an inconvenience it will be to find a replacement bishop for the Southern Church. Now, after killing Catherine and defeating Mycen, we finally get to press on to the doors leading to the Garreg Mach's cathedral. And for the first time in this entire game, and I'm including the other routes in this statement, do we get to see any sort of emotional beat concerning Cyril, and it's literally just Rhea foreshadowing us killing him. And now, I'm not gonna sit here and act like I was the biggest fan of his character in the world, but honestly, he was done really dirty in this game. He was given no screen time, even in Azure Gleam where he's a goddamn ally, let alone he isn't even a playable character anymore. I just want to point that out. I mean, Alois got better treatment and more screen time, and he isn't a playable character either. And Alois is a side character for a side character. Anyways, after killing this poor child who never really did anything wrong, and also literally no one cared about his death either, I just want to talk about that. Not even Dorothea, and she has mourned every single blue lion we have killed along the way. So, as I said, Mans was done dirty. Now, Before pushing any further, Edelgard mentions how fortunate it is that the two greatest enemies of the Empire are just ahead inside the cathedral. And all I really have to say is, damn, is it really just that easy. But this last section is single-handedly probably the most fun fight in the whole game, outside of the Gatekeeper's Paralogue where Shez gets to open a can of whoop-ass on all three of the houses. Honestly, being able to fight both Rhea and Thalas at the same time was so much fun. And also, kind of disappointing because after all of this build-up, you would think that on the top of the list of how to not end the game, both of them quote-unquote killing each other, aka big anime final set piece where everything fades to white and then both of the characters just go missing, would probably be tied for number one with the stereotypical the villain becomes best friends with the protagonist and then everything's fine. I'm looking at you, Vegeta. But don't get me wrong, I love this route and I am extremely biased towards this route because of the fact that both of the Black Eagles routes were the first that I have ever played in Three Houses, but I do gotta say that I still kind of stand by my statement in my last video that Azure Gleam is probably my favorite. Though this is probably actually the best route. I'm not gonna argue with anyone on that. I think outside of Thalas and Rhea going missing and killing both my favorite male and female character in the Blue Lions, this route was amazing. From Edelgard's motivations to making this story, as far as the three nations are concerned, far more shades of gray than just cut and dry black and white shenanigans that we get in Three Houses. I just love the fact that the war between Edelgard and Dimitri isn't just because Dimitri hates her and wants to kill her, and Edelgard doesn't even necessarily want to have this war in the first place either, but things need to go this way because it is essential if things are going to change, and having Claude support her completely is a wonderful choice as well. And going forward, I'm gonna have minor spoilers for the other two routes, so if you haven't played them yet, I apologize, but I'm giving you enough time to click away just in case. But anyways, as I said at the beginning of this video, I feel like Scarlet Blaze is the most important route of the three by far, and that's simply because this route gives you all of the context necessary for every single party concerned. In Azure Gleam, you don't really get much of a grasp on Edelgard's motivations or her plans, or why she's even having this war outside of wanting to take down the church, and in Golden Wildfire, those who slither in the dark are never dealt with. But in this route, you get it all. You get Dimitri's reasons for fighting Edelgard. Instead of him letting her take down Rhea, you get Claude's reasonings for siding with Edelgard, on top of him fundamentally agreeing with her. Though, unlike with Golden Wildfire, you don't necessarily get Claude's motivations, but it's not like you can't figure out what he wants in this route, especially when he all but says it in his conversations with Edelgard, the first one being when they forged their pact, and the second one being when they were talking about their plans again in Zahras. And finally, you of course get to see what Edelgard wants, why Edelgard wants it, and of course we deal with both those who slither in the dark and the church completely. You don't get all of this in the other routes. You get some of it, but not all of it. And if you truly do care about the complete story of this game, and you want to know everyone's reasoning for the war and their motivations, this route literally gives you it all. And that is why I think that Scarlet Blaze is the most important route. I really just wish that so many Blue Lions characters didn't have to die in this route, but you can't have everything. Now, that concludes my review of Scarlet Blaze. This route was amazing. Though the bandit stuff regarding him and Ordelia infuriated me to no end, everything else kind of more than made up for it. And honestly, the writers of this game would have to be insane to write something worse than they did with Golden Wildfire, which is still good, but after playing these other two routes, I gotta say Golden Wildfire unfortunately is easily the worst route. And in retrospect, it's probably the best that I played it first, so I wouldn't need to be so harsh on it. But anyways, as I did in my last review, I want to have a little character highlight section because I love all of these characters and there's a lot of things that added for them that I kind of want to discuss. So the first of which is going to be Lysithea. Now, I know she isn't really a Black Eagle and probably isn't the character I should have started off with, but the major reason why I want to talk about Lysithea a bit is because for whatever reason, she's a million times better in this route than in her own route, which is really weird. But anyways, we all know the whole deal with the experiments that were conducted on her by those who slither in the dark and how she wants to find a way to undo those experiments so she doesn't end up dying young. And I'm really happy that in this route, she actually has some hope of getting just exactly what she wants, because in her her ace support with Ferdinand, it's revealed to her that not only did the research notes on those exact experiments get found by both him and Hubert, but both of them are also trying to find a way to undo them with Linhardt and Professor Hahnemann's assistance as well, and that makes me really happy for her. But one thing I don't like is that I am not really sure why she has no supports with Edelgard at all. I find that really weird. I also feel like both her and Edelgard should also have support conversations with Happy, because I mean, we get a paralogue with the three of them about their shared experience that all three of them have, including Shez. And since we're on the subject of characters that should have supports, I'm just gonna list a few really quickly because I'm kind of upset about this. I'm really mad that Yuri and Bernadetta don't have any as well, considering that they're like childhood friends. Same with Dorothea and Yuri. I mean, their supports in Three Houses were probably my top 5 out of all of them in Three Houses. And speaking of Dorothea, I feel like she should have some with Manuela because, I mean, Dorothea has known her since she was a child and Manuela was her mentor in the opera. Like, I don't understand why there's some extremely obvious pairings that should have supports, but yet they don't have any. And I don't get why that decision was made. And to be fair, all routes and most characters have this issue, but I think this route might actually be the worst offender out of the three, given how many supports the Black Eagles characters just simply don't have with characters outside of their houses. But that aside, the next character I want to highlight is Petra. So after the war, Petra has plans of opening up Brigid to Fodlan, which I'm assuming is mainly just going to be for tourism and trading with Fodlan as well. And Petra personally asked Shez to assist her with all of this, and also request for Shez to help her shape the future of Brigid. And as I said in my Azure Gleam review, I love that Shez has this kind of relationship with several characters in the Blue Lions cast, but it's these types of interpersonal relationships that I really love seeing. And though this is the only kind of relationship that Shez has in Scarlet Blaze, it's really nice to see them have plans for the future regardless. I also like that Petra has plans for the future because in both this game and Three Houses, it seems like her and Brigid are beyond an afterthought, which is really unfortunate given that she's written by the same people who made this story to have a lot of ambition when it comes to both her people and her country. And speaking of interpersonal relationships that I absolutely love seeing, a perfect example of this is with Hubert, surprisingly. Everyone's favorite by-the-book hard-ass. I don't know if maybe I didn't pay enough attention to him in Three Houses or not, but god, did I love him in this game. Not only did Robbie Damon do a wonderful job voicing him as always, but both him and Edelgard's relationships with the other members of the Black Eagles are millions of times better than they were in Three Houses, at least as far as I can remember. It has been a long time and I don't really remember them having the best relationship with everybody. At least not as good as in this game, I should say. But anyways, the one character that stuck out to me the most was Hubert. He seems to actually somewhat like everyone and even care about them instead of only giving a shit about Edelgard. And I loved it. I really did. Honestly though, in Three Houses, the relationship between him and Edelgard wasn't my favorite because I kind of felt like a lot of the time Hubert was leading her down the wrong direction, even if Hubert did do it with her best interest in mind, and he still does do everything with Edelgard's best interest in mind in Three Hopes, but it doesn't feel like he sees everyone else as useless chess pieces. He sees everyone else as actual people, and I love that. And you can clearly tell that he does care about everyone in his supports with Monica and Lysithea alone, but you can also see it very well with Bernie and even Ferdinand. And just in case with those 4 groups of supports you're not really convinced that Three Hopes Hubert is different from Three Houses Hubert, just look at his supports with Happy in this game. He suggests having her side near an enemy base because not only is that something that is obviously a classic Hubert thought process, but of course that suggestion didn't go over very well with Happy whatsoever. And something that surprised the hell out of me was that Hubert genuinely felt bad. Like, I've never seen that man feel bad about anything in Three Houses, and in his ace support with Happy, he still feels bad about it, presumably a good while after this conversation initially happened. And to make it up to Happy, Hubert makes her some coffee and even had a really nice conversation with her about the coffee. And he didn't even react negatively when this conversation led to Happy accidentally letting out a sigh. He also even went as far as covering for her when the monsters attacked the base, which all of this is again a very delightful surprise. And if you can't tell, this game heavily redeemed Hubert for me and honestly made him one of my more favorite characters in this game. And as I mentioned earlier as well, one change that they made for Edelgard that I love is her relationships with everyone around her. Now, in Three Houses, we all know she did genuinely care about the rest of the Black Eagles, but one gripe that I had against her was the whole Flame Emperor thing. That whole ordeal really kind of screwed things up for me personally with her, to the point where I didn't even really know that Silver Snow was an actual thing until I accidentally went into it because I thought I was doing what was best for all of the characters in Three Houses. And after playing this game, I feel even more justified about my choices in that playthrough because Edelgard essentially admitted that in Three Houses, she knowingly and willingly sacrificed Monica to those who slither in the dark so Edelgard could further along her plans. Which, just poor Monica, by the way. She was way too in love with Edelgard to even realize how horrible of a thing that is. And in Scarlet Blaze, honestly, Edelgard not working with those who slither in the dark whatsoever has really made it so much easier for me to stand behind Edelgard as well as her plans and wholeheartedly support her throughout the entirety of the route, though as you've seen me say plenty of times in this video, I'm not exactly jumping up and down about the situation, especially towards the end of the story, and I think that she's 10 times more genuine in this game just because she didn't do the whole Flame Emperor thing. But back to the relationships. So, as I said, in Three Houses, we know that she cared about all of the Black Eagles, but she never really felt like friends with all of them. At least not to the degree of this route, because she genuinely cares about everyone. And even in her supports with Dorothea, her and Dorothea have an adorable contest of nicknames with one another, and even her conversations with Hubert or how she talks with Ferdinand. I mean, the examples are endless in this game, and it's all capped off wonderfully with, at the very end of this route, her giving Shez a big ol' high five. Despite how much she really didn't want to at first, she genuinely looked happy when she finally did it. And I love how different this route is from Crimson Flower, but I'm not going to go any further because as you can tell, this video is already way too freaking long. And if you watched up until this point, thank you so much. It means a lot more than you could ever know, honestly. And also, since I started this little review series, not only did I hit 600 subscribers, but before I could think of even a way to thank all 600 of you, this channel has skyrocketed to currently, as the time that I'm recording this video, 667 subscribers, which is absolutely insane to me. And I want to just say from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate all of you so much. But with that being said, make sure to leave a like and also comment what you thought of Scarlet Blaze, and if you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe. As I said, it means so much to me. I can't thank you enough for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.